remember that anecdote about the $25,000 computer order. Um, let's talk about digital trust and safety. What would you do if you had a $25,000 computer order out of the country, if you're based in the States? Um, Now, we've talked a lot about fraud prevention. Digital trust and safety is really like kind of an increased application of that. So of course, we want to assess that one order correctly, right? Is this something we should ship or something we should not? But really trying to appreciate the other side of the house, which we also talked about, that experience, right? I'll kind of explain how you're able to achieve this, but really this is the aspiration. You want to achieve both things in parallel, not one at the expense of the other, which I think is what a lot of people tend to see as a trade-off when they're just trying to secure their online transactions.
Yeah, and not to keep bringing up examples, but I can think of, when we first started making custom shopping carts,
Hmm.
we did have clients tell us, sort of like, oh, I got a bunch of orders for somebody in Russia, and
Yeah.
I've shipped them, and now like the credit card company is saying this that they didn't even authorize it. So I know
Oh,
that even if you're like, I think that what we're going to get to, and I know we're going to
yeah.
get to this, but Sift is helping us to, or fraud protection in general, is helping us to not have to worry about all those orders all the time, and
Yep.
giving us some breakpoints and pauses to make sure that when we're going to ship something, we feel comfortable for shipping it.
100%. Yeah. Yeah. Sorry, I keep ripping off your examples, but they're really good. Yeah. So we would say, like, hey, if you had that order to Russia that ended up being disputed, obviously that's one we would hope to not process or identify. But if you actually just operate in Russia and you need to ship to Russians, like legitimate customers there, you'd also want to serve, right? So how do you differentiate between the two is kind of the where we're trying to head towards. One thing that I see a lot when I talk to prospective clients or those that are just getting introduced to Sift are the idea of like a rule set. So a lot of times people tend to assess fraud at the point of transaction, right? So I have a really nice looking shoe here for sale, and you tend to apply some logic to the order. Is it over a certain amount? Is the order originated from a particular country? And based on where you go through this logic tree, you ultimately arrive at a decision, should I process this or not? I always use an example that these things can be circumvented. If you recall the first Jurassic Park, so we're well before Chris Pratt, you think of the velociraptors in the pen, right? They always test the fence. They kind of like get a little shocked, hey, this is not where I'm supposed to go. But eventually they find a weakness and then they're out. And then they're creating havoc in the park. Fraudsters tend to do the same things with a lot of traditional fraud prevention. They're kind of testing these rules to see like, hey, what limit can I get away with? Where should I originate the order from? Is the merchant sensitive to express shipping? Things like that. And once they find the conditions in which they can get out in the park and have some velociraptor fun, they will definitely do that. What I'm trying to ask you to consider is, while this part of the user journey is super important, it does leave out a lot of the interaction that happens before the point of purchase. And these insights can be really helpful when you're assessing fraud. Our CEO, Jason, likes to talk about this. It's a little dark, but he always talks about finding fraud can be a little bit like solving crimes. And you're always looking for more clues. You kind of think of like a Sherlock Holmes example, like, oh, the feather in the butler's lapel poisoned the widow, something like that. We're trying to find that very minute detail that might have been overlooked otherwise within a traditional checkout flow. If it's related to the device, adding to a cart, how quickly someone gets through a checkout flow. All of these signals can be really interesting insights for your ability to differentiate between good and bad populations.
I think that a good analogy for an end user in this, or even or a merchant, would be fraudsters try to hack into your site itself to try to
Mm-hmm.
hijack things. So that I think is harder than what you're saying here, just by figuring out what are the rules of the particular site, because somebody could come in as anybody they want, and they might have a machine that's doing it too,
Oh
that
yeah.
just penetrates or checks and continues to ping your site with specific types of things to see when can I check out.
Exactly right. Yeah. It's kind of like an unfortunate reality we live in where I have every confidence my information, sorry, Brent, you too, like some part of our personal identifiable information, excuse me, PII, is available online for sale somewhere. So a lot of times what we'll see at SIFT is you'll have two accounts come to your website, both with Brent's right name. I forget if this is the Norwegian pronunciation, but they get the right pronunciation and spelling there, the right address, all of those baseline things match. However, like you said, the fraudulent actor may interact differently with the site when they're trying to find those exploits, may introduce a lot of orders, logins, etc. So really, hopefully, what you can do is, even though both entities represent themselves as the same person, the manner in which they interact with you should be identifiable if you have the safeguards in place to kind of identify that stuff.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people might say if I'm on their site and I'm telling jokes that are funny, it's not me.
Yeah, you have to check Brent's social media if you need a hashtag Brent joke. They're pretty good. I got some in the back pocket, but I'll save them for the end to kind of keep you throughout the presentation. Um, to kind of keep furthering that last slide, again, what I'd encourage you to consider is really using more of this data to help improve the accuracy of assessing, what's generally fraudy or not. A lot of times I'll talk to merchants that are sitting on like treasure troves of this information, but it may not be leveraged for this purpose. It's one of those things where, it can be really helpful, and, just start considering it as, you have all of the stuff you may be collecting, any of those little things that you may be able to dig out, tease out, can be really helpful for essentially this. We've talked about it, once or twice already, but really my appeal to you is digital trust and safety is really trying to help you understand the difference between a really loyal customer that you want to serve and that fraudster, person in the dark corner that you're just trying to avoid. And like I said, this becomes really important when a lot of some attributes tend to overlap, with one another. So when you think about commonalities that might be present for both a loyal customer and a fraudster, a new address is a particularly relevant one we're seeing in 2020. So I'm a native Californian. I don't live there anymore, unfortunately, but you just see a lot of the wildfires. So a lot of my friends and family are, currently sheltering in, different family homes out of state just to kind of get away from the smoke. So if you're getting a new address and it's like, hey, yeah, normally I ship to San Francisco, but this week it's in Idaho or Oregon or, wherever. A totally legitimate use case that makes sense to a loyal customer. Now, a fraudster, they may have a stolen credit card for someone that happens to live in San Francisco, and they're shipping the good to wherever they can pick up these electronics or what have you. So in this case, both, both orders have new addresses in place, but there's very different reasons why, and very different people that you ultimately want to serve or not serve in this case.
Yeah, and I think this is a great slide that kind of illustrates to your merchant that there are a lot more things that they need to think about, and that at some point you just can't think about all those things all the time. And this is really where
Yes.
machine learning comes in and helps to alleviate some of that pressure that's around that.
Yeah, absolutely. Like my career, like when I started out of university, was doing these reviews. And even on my best day, I need to go get a coffee. I'm gonna have lunch. I assure you, my reviews at 5 o'clock were not nearly as good as the ones at like 10 in the morning. Let's say that. And so that's where a lot of technology can really help carry that burden for you, right? Exactly like you said, Brent. Like having more of those considerations, be able to do it quickly and at scale repeatedly is really important. And again, we want to stay on the also the positive experience side of the house too. So again, benefit to consider here is if I can properly identify, hey, this is a great customer, this is a loyal customer I want to serve, these offers you the opportunity to deliver them better experiences, right? Shoot them a promo code, perhaps expedite checkout, things that your marketing or product teams may currently be considering, like, hey, I want to deliver this thing. You should absolutely push all those innovations to your customers. Just do it to the right populations, right? So in this case, your customers, not the fraudsters.
Yeah, that kind of it reminds me of something that I wanted to purchase, and this something was in the UK,
Mm-hmm.
and the checkout experience when I got to be putting in my St. Louis Park, Minnesota address, it
Mm-hmm.
just stopped me, and there was no way of getting past that.
Yeah.
So, and then nobody like called me to make sure it was
Oh,
okay, and eventually I just like, oh, this, I'm not even going to buy it anymore. So there's some things that where you do want, there are some things where a customer service person needs to reach out to the client to make sure that they're legitimate, and and especially being proactive in that, that's super important. And so I think you're going to get to this too, but there's a point when machine learning takes a lot of that, and then when it doesn't, you need somebody to reach out to that person to make sure that, yes, this is legitimate. You need to talk to that person.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it could be one of those things where hopefully you would be able to identify, a lot of times I hear people being very sensitive to, cross-border payments. So again, those initiated from two different countries, or, you may be shipping outside of the country and the IP is local, something like that. There's some kind of disconnect that normally you see. In your case, Brent, I'd hope, again, if you could properly identify, hey, this is someone we actually want to serve, you could send a little push notification or some kind of email like, hey, we noticed that you're not in the UK. Here's how, if you wanted to place an order with us, how you could accomplish that, a quick, canned response, something. But, the same fraudster that might exhibit similar signals, again, if you're identifying that, that isn't a service you should offer to them, right? Like you shouldn't tell them how to place an order on your website because you're actively not trying to serve them. So yeah, totally get it. It's one of those things where, again, when you have those considerations, how do you change what you do, and how do you actually, hopefully encourage more sales accordingly?
Yeah, and some of the way the machine learning works, and then the kind of that's what you're talking about. Some of those follow up things. Magento is already prepared to do some of those things. So, like, just say you have an established account, you have an email address that's on that account, and then you get stopped because of your
Mm-hmm.
address, and the system is not going to let you go forward. Something like just a simple abandoned cart email
Yeah,
with the reason would kind of spark some of that. But then again, I think that we can continually to refine that to make it a better experience for the user. I think the key is not to
absolutely.
just let the user hang, because it could be a good user.
Yes, yeah, you want to give yourself the opportunity to, sell. Sorry, that sounds a little cold. I was going to say sell them something, but deliver a good experience. Help service them. Provide whatever need they're looking to satisfy.